Welcome to Baseball Biz on Deck. I am Mark Arbit, your host, and with me today I have Mr. Bob Hope. This man has made a difference in baseball for a while. He's done a lot, everything from with the Braves to the Colorado Silver Bullets and much more. We're going to find out a little bit more about Bob here in just a minute. How you doing today, Bob?
I'm doing great. Hope you are.
Man, I am. Thanks a lot for doing that and for joining us here today. Now, you're based out of Atlanta, aren't you?
Right. That's where I am right now.
Hey, have you got the snow off the ground finally?
But no, it's a little icy out there at the moment.
Be careful. Oh my gosh, I couldn't believe that. But yeah, I look at you, I look at Georgia, and I say, you've achieved so much starting out with journalism school. And then the next thing I know, you're working with the Braves and you're moving up, doing more and more responsibility with that. And then finally, now I'm seeing you've also created your own business with Hope, Beckham, and Espinosa with the PR firm. And you guys been together now for about 30 years. This is just amazing, sir.
Yeah, I was, I'm a little older than you, but I was in New York for years and wanted to come back home. So we just came back and started my own business.
That's fantastic, man. Tell me a little bit how that happened, Bob. Because one other thing I want to mention too, you're an author. I know you got a couple books out there. Let's see what the one I remember is "We Could Have Finished Without You."
We could have finished last without you. That's an old line from God. I can't remember who the player was, but it was Pittsburgh Pirates. They finished in last place, and he wanted a raise and went in. And Branch Rickey told him we could have finished last without you. So.
I like that. Well, tell me, man, how did that work from college to the Braves? How did that all come together?
Well, it really serendipity. I mean, I had to work my way through school, and I was in college, and I was working all night in a packaging plant, pushing around giant rolls of craft paper, and then trying to go to college in the morning. And I kept thinking, well, I've got to do this for 4 years. I want to find something I'd like to do, if I'm going to work. And I just made a list of places that looked like they'd be enjoyable to work, and the Braves were the top of my list. And I showed up on a Saturday morning at the old Atlanta Stadium, and the Braves had just moved to Atlanta, and they were out actually working out of trailers, which helped for me. They didn't have offices inside the stadium, and I just wandered through the trailers, and a man named Jim Hay, who was in charge of operations for the Braves, was there, and I told him I needed a job while I was in school, and he said, "What would you like?" And I said, "Anything you have is better than what I'm doing." And so he called me about a week later, and he said, "Are you the young guy that came by to meet with me Saturday?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Look, we just need sort of an errand boy in the office, somebody that will do whatever we need done. Would you be interested in it?" So I did, and I took the job and worked there not very long before the assistant PR director was leaving to go in the military for 6 months right before the season started.
Wow.
And so they asked me if I wanted to interview for it. And of course, I definitely did. And called me in. And I remember Lee Walburn was the PR director, and he asked me if I knew how to write a press release. Well, I didn't know what a press release was, but I thought if I say no, the interview's over. So I told him, "Oh, absolutely. I love it." And then told him I could do baseball statistics, and he threw me a curve. He said, "Bring me in examples tomorrow." And so I had to scramble around. I went down to the old Atlanta Constitution's sports department, and they helped me put together a couple of press releases and dummied up some baseball statistics, and I put them in a folder and took them to Lee the next day, and he hired me.
Wow, brother. I love that. I love the initiative you shown too. Once he threw you kind of that curveball, said, "Hey, oh, by the way, can you show me something?" You found the path to go ahead and bring that together, and they respected what you were able to do with it.
Well,
wow.
Lee was a great boss, as it turned out. He was really my mentor. He helped me in a lot of different ways, and he was the reason when he left the Braves. I was 24 years old, and I'd been there obviously a while because I worked through college, and they were going to do a national search, I guess, to find a replacement for him. And Lee told him, "Well, I think even though he's 24, I think he can do the job. And by the way, if you give it to him, but he can't do it, just fire him." And so they gave me the job, and and part of it was we were hosting the Major League Baseball All-Star game that summer. And I'd been working on it, and Lee'd been working on it, and I was really the one who knew what was going on. So if I had left, it would have left them in a difficult situation. So they gave me a shot, and I wasn't going to let it fail.
Wow. And you built a relationship with a baseball icon while you were there too, and Mr. Hank Aaron. And that must have been something in and of itself. How did that come to be?
Well, it's pretty easy. I was the PR guy, and he was going through the home run chase to set the record and or break Babe Ruth's home run record, and we just became good friends. It was working with him. I think some things you do better when you're young than you would when you're old.
Yeah.
I felt like my job was really to accommodate him and make sure that the media had access to him, but on a reasonable basis. I wasn't going to make any huge demands to him. And it just worked out really well. I mean, we became very close friends. We never really had a crossword. Uh, we remained great friends the rest of his life, and to the point where when he died, there were only two non-family pallbearers at his funeral. One was Dusty Baker, and I was the other one. So we were very good friends.
Yeah. That means a lot. And to have a friendship with a man like that. And from everything I've seen of Hank Aaron and read about him, it sounds like he was a complete gentleman. And it seemed like in many cases he put other people first before himself. And that's not something you always see with people who are stars in one thing or another.
And he generally was just a wonderful person. I mean, he treated everyone the same. He dealt with presidents of the United States and kids and just all kinds of baseball fans. And to him, everybody was equal. And you could see that in the way he treated them, just graciously, and always had that great smile. And he was always trying to do what was right and what was good.
Well, I remember hearing one story about you and him and the kids in the dugout. And uh, before there was a Miracle Network and some other things of that nature, the how did that come to be with him building, I don't know, relationship or meeting and greeting children who were suffering?
Yeah, what happened is, and I'd say this may have been about 2.5 years or so before he broke the record, but it was considerably before he broke the record. And we were having Murphy Candler Little League Day on a Sunday at the stadium, and the head of the Little League called and said, "We have one of our players has leukemia. Is there any way we can get a special picture made with Hank Aaron?" And I said, "Well, sure, we'd arrange it." And they took the picture before the game, but not because of anything we did. Unbeknownst to us, the photo appeared in the newspaper the next day. And it just, here's Hank Aaron with a youngster with leukemia. And suddenly our phone started to ring, and it was people who had a youngster that had some sort of disease or, some reason that they they wanted their child to meet Hank Aaron. So I asked Hank about it, and he said, "Yeah, start bringing them on down before the game." So we did this, and it sort of got out of hand. And I'd have to make arrangements for somebody to take them down, and we'd have genuinely 4 or 5 or 6 of them every game. And I was getting a little, I guess, cynical because it was clear that some of them weren't sick. Some of them were, but some of them, the parents were just using it as an excuse to get a picture with Hank Aaron. So we went down each game, and I reluctantly, begrudgingly, I did it. And then we had a National League meeting of all the various PR directors and all the various teams, and they said there was a new rule that kids weren't allowed in the dugout before the game. So I went back to Hank and I said, "Hank, I can save you, a half hour before the game where you can just go to the back of the clubhouse and relax and all, because all these kids that are coming down before the game to meet you, because their parents say they're sick. You and I know that a lot of them aren't sick. And so we don't have to do it. It's against the rules." And he said, "No," he said, "I'd like to keep doing it." And I said, "Well, Hank, most of them aren't really sick." And he said, "Bob, but some of them are."
Yeah.
And so he just continued to do that all the way through as long as he was with the Braves. But one time, many years later, I was walking through the airport, I remember in Los Angeles, and a man walked up to me and introduced himself, and knew who I was, and he said, "You probably don't remember me," and I didn't. And he told me that he had called me and asked if there was any way his son could meet Hank Aaron, that his son, they lived in Orlando, they were going to be in Atlanta for a game, and then his son was going to, I think it was New Orleans, to have open heart surgery the next week.
Wow.
And he told me that Hank was great, had his picture made with him, signed the ball for him. And he told me that his son died on the operating table the next week, that they buried him with his Hank Aaron ball. So, but that was, nobody knew Hank did that, but that was just the graciousness of a wonderful human being.
Well, those are the kind of stories that can warm the hearts about anybody. And I mean, like you said, he wasn't necessarily seeking everybody's approval or looking for him to do that. It just sounds like that's who he was. And I'm glad to hear that you were able to be part of that man's life as well. You know, the show was called Baseball Biz. And I want to ask you, as far as being in the public relations, and when you're with Hank Aaron and you're looking at that number, 715 coming up, how do you plan for something you can't plan for? I mean, you if you schedule an event and you know it's going to be on this date and time at 8 o'clock and everybody's going to be there, but if it's dependent upon when a ball goes across the plate at just the right time and just so the person can hit that home run, you don't know when that's going to happen. How did it go for that period? Maybe the last couple of weeks before Hank Aaron hit that number 715.
Well, it actually was way more than a couple of weeks. It was really a full season or more ahead of it. And we had about 400 media people covering the every game. I mean, just some of them were national folks who traveled to every game. They were the local Atlanta media, and then of course the media in any particular market. And just in sitting down and figuring out what needed to be done, we realized that there were certain, particularly national media people, who would need some private time with Hank to interview him. And so we cut out segments during the day of like 20-minute segments where 6 or 8 of them could meet with him individually. But then we had a pregame press conference. We set up almost like a presidential press conference. We have a pregame press conference and then a postgame conference for everybody to have an opportunity to ask him questions. And we did things like we put out a Hank Aaron media guide. Even though we had the team media guide, there was so much interest in Hank that we did one on his back. Just everything you could ever think of about Hank Aaron. We did a biography of Babe Ruth that was fairly extensive, and then just things like that to support the media that was covering. And then for the individual teams, where we'd visit a team, we gave them a procedure to follow. For instance, Hank was like the Beatles coming to the U.S. I mean, people would just mob around the bus, and it was almost impossible to get him in and out of anything. So we'd have the bus drive on the field so he could go through the dugout to get to the clubhouse before and after the game, and just different things like that. And we also did like a formatted poster that if the Cincinnati Reds or whatever wanted to have a Hank Aaron night, this would be a poster they could easily adapt and print and give to fans. So we tried to do a nice job of it, and I think we did. I mean, it was as it built up, we didn't know when it was going to happen, but we certainly were prepared every night for a big influx, particularly of media and fans.
Well, and Bob, I had forgotten it actually did cross seasons, did it? I mean, we were wondering if we were going to finish one season with him having it done, and it didn't come until the following, did it?
No, it's true. No, it was interesting. We had the back then the final weekend of the season was not always it was in September. If you were out of the playoffs, you weren't going to have a huge crowd. So we had I'd say maybe 15, 16, 17,000 people on a Saturday night before the season ended on Sunday in Atlanta. And Hank at that time had 712 home runs. Well, he hit a home run that night, which meant the next home run he hit would tie Babe Ruth.
Right.
Well, we didn't have computerized tickets back then. We just, you had to find the individual ticket, and we had to get it in somebody's hands. So and in order to do that, you didn't know when you were going to have huge crowds, so you'd have like blank tickets printed up that just didn't say the date, just said Series A, Series B, and all. And we pretty much had depleted most of those in the ticket vault. And so on he hits his home run 713 on Saturday night. Well, we had just a crush of people coming to see the Sunday game. I mean, it was like, and we didn't have enough tickets, so we were out there, mimeographing and Xeroxing tickets and selling things, just getting people in the stadium, and literally we just couldn't get everybody in. I mean, I think we ended up with maybe 44,000 people, but that was all the people we could get in. We probably had equally that number outside that we just really couldn't come up with tickets, couldn't get them in the stadium. Just, it was just too much of a crush.
I mean, and that must have felt weird and wacky too when you think about you're saying maybe only 14 or 15,000 a few nights before, and then suddenly you've got this influx up to about 42,000. That must have been a heck of a
Well,
push.
Well, it was. I mean, it was just. It took all the everybody we had to just get those people in there, and it was, you're young and you're having a good. I mean, you know your experience in history, but you don't really, think of it necessarily in those terms. It's just an exciting time. So we were pretty amazed we got as many in as we did, and then I think one of the kind of sweetest sports moments I've seen is you have 43,000 people there to see Hank Aaron do something he didn't do that
Right.
day. And
Right.
so I think I want to say he grounded out the third base his last time at bat. And it was really, sort of chilling that he just, jogged out the left field or he was playing left field. And he's standing there, and suddenly one person stands, and then everybody else stands, and probably I don't know for a long time, easily 10 minutes or so, the entire crowd stood and gave him a standing ovation for someone who didn't do what they came to see him do, which was out of respect for who he was and what he had been through and what a great person he was.
Well, it's amazing he was, and respect all the man that achieved. And I'm thinking, one of the things I want to talk to you about this on this show was, of course, is women in baseball as well. And my mind goes back to Hank Aaron before he came to the Braves, and he was with the Indianapolis Clowns.
Right.
And when he left there, it was a woman who came onto the team with the Clowns after that. It was Tony Stone.
Yeah, Tony Stone was really probably the impetus as to one of them why I wanted to do the Silver Bullets, or the team that was named the Silver Bullets, in order to prove to baseball that women could play baseball. And I didn't really know. I mean, Major League Baseball had a couple of medical studies that had been done that said women could not play baseball because their forearms were too frail and their hips were shaped in a certain way, and that they just couldn't pitch overhand and all that business. And I didn't know. It just didn't make sense to me. I thought, well, gee, I mean, you watch little girls and little boys out throwing the ball around. They seemed like they could do it. So Hank, um, to me about he would say when he was out scouting or different places, he'd see a woman who was a softball player. He thought if she was a guy that she'd be a prospect. And so we talked about it and actually had a tryout at Georgia Tech in 1984. So it was 10 years before we did the Silver Bullets, just to have, as Jim Morris, who was a coach at Georgia Tech, baseball coach, used to do the Cincinnati Reds tryouts, and Jim was a skeptic. He was not pleased. He was just doing it because Hank and I asked him to have a tryout of women. We didn't have the greatest women come in, but we announced we were having tryouts and had probably maybe 40 women, from different places in the Southeast show up to try out for this fictitious baseball team we're going to put together. And Jim Morris's comment was, the stopwatch doesn't lie. He said, I'm just going to treat them like guys. The stopwatch doesn't lie. And then he came back at the end of them and he said, look, there's one player in here. If she was a guy, I'd rank her as a big league prospect. And there are about three that I would say are minor league prospects. And we thought, well, it sort of planted the seed, and it took about 10 years to figure out how to do a team. And, luckily we ran into Leo Kiley, who was the CEO of Coors, who wanted us to do something in baseball that was unusual, that would get a lot of attention and could travel the country and all. And so I told him about the idea of having a women's baseball team and doing it right, doing it as a experiment to just find out how good women could be in baseball and to get a legitimate coaching staff and to play baseball the way it had been played, the way the Braves play it, and just find out how well they could do. And so we, Coors put in the seed money, and then we went out and got some other sponsors and went around the country. And I think the first year we had tryouts all over the country and had about 5,000 women try out. And we didn't know what to expect. We didn't know whether to be tennis players or aerobics teachers or what, but we really found out that if somebody hadn't played a lot of softball, they really didn't have a chance to play baseball very well. So we came up with a roster of 24 and just there were no women's teams to play that were credible teams. So we, played. We didn't know what level they could play. So we, anyway, we put together the team and went out, and mostly the first year we played against old men's team, over 40 amateur teams and all, and the Silver Bullets really struggled. Oh my gosh, because they hadn't seen pitches, and they didn't couldn't hit curve balls and all. But by the fourth year, they were good. I mean, they could beat most college baseball teams, could beat low minor league teams occasionally, and even had a game in Rochester, New York, where they beat the New York Penn League All Stars, which is a fast A league, meaning they're all
Wow.
prospects.
Yeah, I know. I've had the good fortune to have Tamara Holmes on the show before. I know she talks about her time with the Bullets and the joy of that. She went on and wound up being with the USA Women's National Team. And to me,
Yeah,
it's a. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
and I was going to say, and Tammy could hit at any. I don't care what level. I mean, if you put her in the big leagues, she could hit. I think with the Silver Bullet, she hit close to 400. This is playing against men, and what we found is if we were playing a Class A minor league team, um, the organization that they were in did not want them to get beat, so they would bring in a couple of AAA pitchers. And so we'd be playing a Class A team with a couple of AAA pitchers, and Tammy just didn't. She's she's tall, she's lanky, she's strong, she's probably I don't know, maybe 175 pounds, but she could handle herself, and she could hit. I don't think she'd hit a lot of home runs, but she certainly could hit doubles and triples.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I met her. She's a very wonderful person, and but the strength that you see, how she carries herself, and the workouts that she does to maintain that. I respect her for so many different things, but I would have loved to be able to see her, go up against some of those AAA pitchers and put one out, put one out there. So, geez, Denise. Well, let me ask you something else too. But because before you had Coors, and before you had the Silver Bullets, before that, you actually were looking at a team and trying to put together with a league down in Florida, weren't you?
Yeah, the Florida State League had an opening for in Daytona Beach, and this was Hank Aaron and I. We thought, well, that's where we had the tryouts, and we were going to try to put together a team and have some women on the team. It wasn't going to be an all women's team necessarily, but we were going to do it. But it was interesting. We had our tryouts and they went well, um, but Major League Baseball at the time was not pleased. I mean, we got a letter from the commissioner saying it was a travesty to baseball that we were doing it. Um, but over the next, I guess, 10 years before we really actually did the Silver Bullets, the attitude of the country changed. It wasn't, there were some people that just insisted that women couldn't play baseball, but nobody thought it was a travesty for them to try.
Yeah, that kind of language always kind of irks me, but that's my own personal issues. Um, I wanted to ask you when I'm seeing the development of everything with Hope Beckham Espinosa. When did that start? When were you no longer part of the Braves organization and
What?
doing?
Well, what you find, I mean, I was lucky in that, I went through the Hank Aaron time and managed the Major League Baseball All-Star game and was young. And because I did the All-Star game and Hank Aaron, I had a really high profile in baseball. But then Ted Turner came along and bought the Braves, and I was a good promoter. I mean, he wanted, a good publicist, and he wanted to be famous. And he said, all the media in the country, make me famous. Um, but Ted is a great boss, but he's pretty intense. And your life is working for Ted. And I had two little girls, and I think there were five direct reports. One of them, Bill Lucas, died of a stroke at age 42. The other one of them had a heart attack, and all three of the others all went through divorces. And I just thought, I was the youngest, and I thought I first of all, I didn't know what, we had just started CNN and all that. I didn't know where all that was going to go. I thought, man, we could go out of business at any time, but I was working night and day. I was, did the Braves, did the Hawks, did the television, and we didn't have cell phones back then, so I had three offices, and it was a mess. And so I finally just went into Ted one day and said, "Look, I love you. You're great. This has been an incredible ride, but I got to stabilize my life." And I thought the most stable thing I could do was go to work for Coca-Cola. And as it turned out, that was way more stable than it was just when, compared to working for Ted, it was incredibly boring, I thought, even though it was, typical of corporate America. And so I did that for a couple of years. And then I thought, well, if I work for, you know, if I had, an agency, I could work for Ted and I could work for, Coca-Cola, both work for the Braves and Coca-Cola. And that turned out to be a pretty good idea. And so did that. And then the largest PR firm in the world at the time was Burson Marsteller in New York. And they bought, our agency in Atlanta, and then they moved me to New York. So I had a terrific job. I mean, it was, if you want to be a New Yorker, I had the best job in the world because, we had 800 PR people in the building, and I didn't have to deal with any of the painful stuff. I was just up there floating around dealing with the fun stuff. And, they paid me well and had a limo and all that business. So I enjoyed that, but it was rough on my family. I mean, it was, and also when I went to New York, I was a little bit like a kid going to Disney World. I just wanted to see what it was like. And then you get up there and you realize they kind of expect you to stay. And I don't think I expected that. So after several years, I finally, my wife every day said, "Get me back home, get me back home." I finally said, "Okay, I've had my run. We'll come back home." So I was just looking for something I could do that would be an escape. And in my mind, they were great to me in New York. They were offering me, all kinds of money and all to stay, but I had in my mind that it's not money. It's just this is a family thing, which I probably was stupid in that, but because I could have just commuted from Atlanta. But the but anyway, came back and just started this. But we've had a good run. We've been able to work on the Olympics and work on just a lot of different things. We worked with a lot of communities that want sports teams. We helped Miami get what was in the Florida Marlins became the Miami Marlins. Now we helped Denver get the Colorado Rockies. Helped Charlotte get the Charlotte Hornets. Helped Ottawa get the Ottawa Senators. We worked with St. Louis to move the Rams to St. Louis. They've since moved back to Los Angeles, but done a lot of stuff like that. That's been interesting. Then you get to meet great people.
Well, you're talking about these teams and the cities are going to. Are MLB's always it seems like they're talking more and more about expansion. Is there anything in your hopper right now that you're looking at working with any cities or that you can
No,
speak of?
I think I'd like to. I'm as you get older, you probably have less opportunity for that. But I do. I tell people it's it. I was telling somebody today, it really wasn't as hard as people want to make it. I mean, it's what I found in that process is first of all, you got to have a place to play. You got to have an owner with the money, or a lead owner who can cover the whole thing, and then get investors in. But you also have to do what the leagues ask you to do. And that's very hard for people with big egos.
Yeah.
The league says do these 15 things, they're going to do 11 of them, and then they're going to go off and do things like, the example I'll use sometimes is the owners will tell you, don't come to the owners meeting and try to smooze us, don't have cocktail receptions and all that. Well, you know, most of them do that anyway, despite the fact they're being told not to. And so I just say, hey, what you want to do is just call the league and tell them, look, we know all these other groups are coming in and wining and dining you and having receptions and all, and we know you told us not to, and and the criteria you sent us, what should we do? And they'll say, well, you get a lot of brownie points if you don't show up. So I tell people you've saved your money and you won the day. So you just do what the league tells you to do. I mean, if you go through and you do all, if they tell you here are 15 things to do, and you got a viable market, and you got a place to play and a good owner, you're going to get a team.
I like that, Bob. Just listen to what they tell you and actually complete the task. Here's the 15 items, take care of them, and we really don't care to see you. So, and that sounds like you get some good results, man. I tell you what, nothing like following the instructions.
Well, it is. I mean, I learned it pretty well. Charlotte was a good example because they had no chance. I remember David Stern was the commissioner of the NBA, and when I called him and told him I had somebody from Charlotte that wanted to come see him and ask if they were expanding, he said they were expanding. He said, "Let me tell you though," he said, "we haven't had a meeting, but he said we do have an A list of cities and a B list of cities we might like to go to. Charlotte's not on either one." He said most of our owners couldn't tell you if Charlotte was in North Carolina or South Carolina, and they don't know the difference between Charlotte and Charleston. So
Oh,
it'll be a cold day in hell before they get a team. But if you want to come see me, come on.
oh gosh, Bob. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's amazing to me when you have to look at a matrix of all the different items that you had to pull together with any project. And I want to go back to the silver bullets for a moment because I'm thinking when you were putting that team together, when you were trying to find that talent, you're not dealing with one city. You're dealing with all these different places that you're going to have the team play in probably more than 40 games most seasons. And it's like, well, I don't know, maybe how the Savannah Bananas do it now, but I'm thinking you have to have a relationship with every one of those fields and the teams that you're going to be playing. That sounds like that must have been a lot of work in and of itself.
Well, I think it was work, but we had a staff. But I think that the good thing about it is the right people were cooperating. Coors was willing to put in the seed money, to make it possible. But all of um, you know, the equipment companies and the beer yeah, not beer companies because Coors is doing that. The soft drink companies, the typical sponsors of baseball all jumped on board to participate. And it wasn't because they thought they were going to sell more products necessarily. It was just because women were having a chance. I remember Louisville Slugger back then used to, we didn't have all the various bats in the big leagues they have today, but
Oh
back
yeah.
then you had the wooden bats that had your signature on it if you were a player. Well, Louisville Slugger, came down to spring training and they checked the players to see what size bat they should have and all. And then
Wow.
they didn't have to do this, but the players just lit up because they got 24 bats with their signatures on it, and they didn't expect that. And so, and it was just interesting to see how people jumped on board to cooperate. Minor league baseball was very supportive, and part of the reason they were supportive is they felt it was, they liked the idea, but it also gave minor league operators an extra opening. If they could promote it and get a crowd in, it's another $30,000 or whatever they would get on one night. And they would, and so they'd line up trying to you know, get on the schedule. We didn't have any problem scheduling at all. And then we had way more teams that wanted to play the Silver Bullets than we ever could possibly play. They were
Wow,
just,
that's great.
and then as they got better and better, the tough thing originally was to match the quality of the Silver Bullets with the competition, which was really tough the first year because the women had not played baseball, and they just winning a game was a rarity. But the last year they were good. I mean, they absolutely won more games than they lost. They played really good competitor, beat the Nicaraguan national team. They
Wow.
beat the New York Penn League All Stars. They beat a lot of college teams, a lot of minor league teams. They just really, developed over 4 years to be excellent baseball players.
Well, I look at this and I see you and I see Hank Aaron both recognizing the value and strength of some really great women baseball players out there.
Yeah,
But
well, I think that was it. But also, it was interesting when, Coors said they would support it, but only if we did it right. And we wanted to do it right. But that meant getting a quality coaching staff. If you're going to get elite women athletes, they got to know that they're being coached by people who know what they're doing. And I made a list of potential managers, and they had to be. I thought, well, they got to manage at least in the minor leagues. Ideally, have played in the big leagues, have some name recognition, have coached in the big leagues, and I made my list of people I thought you could trust on the road to do a really good job with a group of 24 women players. And my list was Phil Necro, Phil Necro, Phil Necro. I didn't have number two. And so I called Phil up and I told him what we were doing. And he remember his first reaction was, I don't think so. I said, Phil, I don't want an answer. I want you to talk to Phyllis, who was his sister and his catcher growing up. talk to Nancy, your wife, and then I'm going to call you next week. And when I called him next week, he said, well, if we do it right, I'll do it. Well, Phil had such great respect within baseball that the coaching staff we had was just great. I mean, we had Joe Pignatano as our catching coach, and he had been the catching coach of the Mets. We had let's see, Johnny Grubb, who played in the big league 16 years, had two World Series rings. We had, uh, just a really, Joe Negro was a pitching coach, just, really excellent players. Paul Blair, was one. I mean, just these were amazing people, and they were very devoted to it, and they really liked what they were doing. We didn't, they could have made more money doing something else, but the reason they liked it, they said, is that Phil described. He said the women had elephant ears. He said if you tell an 18, 19-year-old boy how to do something, he's not going to listen. He thinks he already knows. He said these women really wanted to, they wanted to be coached. They wanted to know, you know, Al Bumbry, who was our hitting coach one year, he was hired away during the year by the Cleveland Indians and was the hitting coach of the Indians in the World Series that year.
Wow. Wow. Oh man, that is great. I mean, the idea, I love it that you had a list of four different folks, and each one were Phil Negro, and to think that you placed it in a way where he was going to have to give it some thought, and the idea that he had been pitching to his sister, as that was her say her name was Phyllis.
Yeah, Phyllis, and by the way, he and Phil, he loved that team. I mean, he at the. I wish I had recorded the speech he gave to him the last game of the first season. Basically said, he said, I've been in baseball 35 years, and he said, I hear people whisper and say, "Oh my gosh, is this what it's come to that Phil's coaching a group of women?" He said, but I think about it and I realize, he said, half of the population of women. He said, if we want to be America's pastime, we can't be be truly America's pastime if women are prohibited from playing. And he said, the other time, he said, other thing is every time one of you makes a catch, gets a hit, makes a great play, I realize that would never happen unless somebody stepped up and gave you that opportunity.
I want to applaud what you did with them, but you beyond the Silver Bullets, you did a lot with Billie Jean King, I believe, with Women's Sports Foundation.
Yeah, and that was really started with the Silver Bullets. I didn't really know about it when I was, our first step when we were going to put together the Silver Bullets before we knew it had a name, just going to do trying to figure out how to do a women's baseball team that was be as legitimate as possible. The first thing, and Coors said this, we want to know whether women actually want to play baseball.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Women's Sports Foundation, which Billie Jean King founded and still involved with, um, I thought, well, I'll go visit with her and find out. So I went up there. Donna Lopiano was the CEO and Billie Jean King the chairman. And Billie Jean just said, look, she said, when I was growing up, my brother played baseball. He said, it was Randy Moffett who played in the big leagues for the Giants for a while. And he said, I was a better baseball player than he was. He said, given the opportunity of baseball or tennis, I would have played baseball because said I love playing baseball, and said there are a lot of women that just want that opportunity. And you do find out. And then Don Lopiano, who is the CEO, said that, a telling moment is when a little girl sits in the stands with her dad watching a baseball game. And she sees a second baseman out there who's not big, not particularly strong, playing baseball. And she looks at her dad and said, that's what I want to do someday. So the dad's got to either look at her and say, you can't do that, you're a girl, or tell her, to get in the backyard, practice, try hard, get with the team and see how good you can get. And maybe someday you could. She said, give them the chance. They don't have to play in the big leagues, but, most kids who play baseball, most guys don't play in the big leagues either.
Well, the doors have continued to open, and with you, Billie Jean King, and a lot of other folks doing a lot. Well, the early days with you and Hank Aaron and Phil Necro, the young ladies that came on with the Silver Bullets, it's made a difference. I loved watching this past year the USA Women's National Team up there in Thunder Bay playing in the tournament there for the World Cup. To
Yeah.
me, yeah, It's great to see these things happening, and there's talk of a couple of different leagues starting here. There's a softball league with Kim Ang starting up. There is, I think, Baseball for All is putting something together, and beyond that, some of the original folks from All American Girls Professional Baseball League started putting a tournament together with some of the best women in the game that could be seen. They were in Sarasota 2 years ago. They were in Durham this year. There's a lot of things going on in the hopper right now, Bob, and I'm I'm excited about all of it. I'm just hoping it could coalesce and be
Well,
strong together.
well, I think it will. I mean, it's first of all, it's very difficult. I know to start a baseball league. If you drew an analogy with professional football. I remember years ago when I was in New York, I was talking to Donald Trump, and he was going to start a competitive major league, like Major League Baseball. And I looked down, I said, hold on, you play 162 games. That's a lot of opportunity to be successful and a lot of opportunity to fail. And by the way, you failed in the USFL and you only played 14 games. I said, just baseball is very difficult to establish a league in.
Yeah.
However, there is a way. If little girls and teenage girls want to play, and the momentum builds, they'll find their course. And it could be in playing co-ed. I mean, I have to say that people like Tammy and some of the better players wouldn't have any problem at all, playing on certainly a low minor league team, and some of them would, competitively rise up. I mean, it's just, baseball is probably the only sport where men and women could compete on somewhat equal basis. You're not going to have as many power hitters, certainly with the women, but they can play like the old 1952 White Sox. They can play a base at a time. In fact, when the way they beat the New York Penn All Stars was really comical. We were in Rochester, New York, and Frontier Field, which is in the parking lot of Kodak, and I'm up in the one of the suites with the Kodak executives, and a guy named John Barr looks at me when they're introducing the players, and he said, "Bob, this is ridiculous. Who scheduled this game? Because these giant, husky, strong, players were being introduced as the New York Penn League All Stars, and then you have this group of women that just look like they're women in your neighborhood, but in good shape, introduced as the Silver Bullets." And he said, "This is ridiculous." He said, "These women shouldn't be playing these guys." But then we had a pitcher, Pam Davis, and Pam Davis was like a little Greg Maddux. I mean, her fastball may have been 82, 83 miles an hour, and changeup may have been, you know, 60, 55 or something, but she could hit the corners. And when she was on, she was unhittable. Nobody could hit her. And she wasn't always on, but that particular day she was on. And they got up there, and about the fifth inning or so, it was 0-0. And I thought, well, we're going to be around here forever until Pam Davis's arm wears out. But then somehow the Silver Bullets got a runner on first and a runner on third, and they did a delayed double steal. Well, these guys had never seen a delayed double steal. They had them so messed up. The catcher, started to throw to second base, and then he looked, and here comes a runner from third, and then he ends up trying to stop, and he bloops the ball in the center field, and 2 runs score. And then I remember John Barr, who had told me earlier, who scheduled this game, it's ridiculous. He looks over at me and said, "The women are going to win. The women are going to win." Well, the guys were getting so, flustered that they were getting beat by a group of women, but the women played great baseball. It just wasn't, it wasn't going to be power hitting baseball. It was taking a base at a time, but it was very, very, very well executed baseball.
Wow, man. I tell you what, those are the moments I guess you live for when you're putting something like that together and you could just see it out there on the field take place. Jeez, Bob, I would have loved to have been there with you guys in the stands to see that.
Well, I mean, you just realize it's a real team.
Yeah.
It's Phil Necro being interviewed. We had a riot in Albany, Georgia. We were down
Ooh.
there, and I remember I wasn't there that night when they had the riot, and they called me afterwards, telling me we had a riot, and I said, "A baseball riot," and I said, "Hold on a second, let me call Phil." So I called Phil up, and I said, "Well, Phil, hold on, you had a baseball brawl on the field?" And he said, "Yeah, we had one." And I said, "Well, you've seen a lot of them over the years." I said, how would you rank this one? He said, well, I'd rank it right at the top. And so, but Phil being interviewed with it, what the way it started was the pitcher on the other team threw at one of our players,
Oop.
Kim Bratz, and then she started to walk towards the mound. He laughed at her, that made her mad, and she charged out. Both teams emptied the dugout, and Phil's comment was, "Look, we're a baseball team. You can't treat us that way. We're a
Yeah.
baseball team." And they were. I mean, the attitude of Phil and the coaches is this is a professional baseball team. And they're going to handle themselves well, and they're going to, stand their ground, and they're going to play baseball the way it's supposed to be played.
I love it. I absolutely love it, Bob. I mean, that's it. It's about showing the respect to these women, giving them the opportunity to play, and by gum, you better treat them with respect like you would any other ball player. To one, to hit the player, and then two, to laugh. No, guess what, buddy? Whoever that player is that you hit, whatever the gender, you should expect a
Oh
comeuppance
yeah.
right then. Oh gosh. Oh wow. Well, Bob, I can't thank you enough, brother, for being with us today. Is there anything else you think you'd like to cover that we haven't talked about today?
No, this is good. And I appreciate you caring enough to do this. This
Not.
is meaningful to me.
Yeah. Well, I also like to point out you do things above and beyond this. I saw something, and perhaps you can help me uh, come to it. I think about folks that give back, and I saw something in passing about you and maybe your organization doing something with some folks in Honduras.
Yeah, I've done that for, God, I guess almost 30 years now. I just started, you can't do everything, but you can do something. And I just started taking a group of friends to, uh, I say a group of friends is a big group now, maybe about 65 or something. But at first year, it was about 6 or 7 to an extremely rural area in Honduras that had no schools and no medical care. It was just, it was like stepping back in a century. I mean, you had to go through these mountain roads for about 11 hours, and there were no bridges, so you'd have to find a shallow place in the river. And it was really, back then, it was, you really felt like you were at a different time.
Wow.
But we just started to build schools, and now the schools are excellent. The kids all end up going to college. I mean, it's just, I have about 65 people that go. It's just, the campus looks great. I mean, you wouldn't, you'd be proud if your kids went there. It's just been very interesting to see the evolution, but you realize that the two things that build goodwill are if you can help people with their health care, and if you can help people with education, give them access to knowledge. And the people out there just love our group coming in, and we love to do it. And they have a good staff down there that handles it all. And we, it's just something I always look forward to. We're going March 1st through the 8th this year. I always tell people we go 1 week a year because we're uninvited guests. We're not going to go back again. So,
Oh, goodness. Is there any way that the rest of us could help with that? Or is there donations or just things that we should be doing otherwise?
um, well, I mean, if somebody wanted to donate, they could, send some money via Zelle to 678-362-4883 and just make a donation. If somebody wanted to go on the trip, they could call me at that phone number, and they certainly are welcome to join us.
Okay. Well, I'll make sure I put that in the notes on the show because there's so many people that give back, and you're not beating your chest. A lot of people aren't elsewhere, but I'm glad to see that happen. I'll just tell one quick brief story, and that a fella, let's see, an author we've had on here before, Rick Vaughn, who I absolutely love. He's done a lot writing books about baseball. He used to be with the Orioles and the Rays organizations. But he does some things here in the Tampa area actually over in St. Pete, and it's a homeless empowerment program. And they do a lot as far as helping folks who are in need, not just feed them for today, but help them with housing, have ways that to put them on a path to a career and independence. And when I see those sort of things, it's just like I want to share them because that encourages all the rest of us to do something. If not specifically that, something like that. So thank you for giving us some light and some opportunities to see, what we all should be doing anyway, and that's helping one another. So thank you, brother.
No, I think it always, and the trips are good. I always tell people, don't just go thinking you're helping the people down there. You're helping yourself.
Amen.
down there. I mean, if there's 65 people on the trip, I guarantee you there are 3 or 4 people that didn't know anybody when they came down there, and they'll have 60 new friends when they come back. Just and plus you have a wonderful experience. We call it a wilderness trip, but the truth is, a wilderness is just another name for a paradise.
I like that. All right. Well, Bob, thank you once again for joining us here today on Baseball Biz on Deck, and keep on doing what you're doing, my friend. And I'm looking forward to seeing more, so thanks again, and look forward to talking with you again real soon.
Okay, great. I appreciate it. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
All right, brother. Well, thank you again for joining us here today, and we look forward to talking with you again real soon.
You have been listening to Baseball Biz on Deck with Mark Corbett on a special Women in Baseball episode. Remember, you can find more episodes at baseballbizondeck.com. Special thanks to XTakeRUX for the music, Rocking Forward.